By 1998, the new modern Star Wars line, Power of the Force 2, was getting a lot of applause, and it was making a lot of new fans and breaking a lot of new ground. In fact, pretty much everything they put out there was selling. You could really say that Power of the Force 2 was a toy line on the grow. Okay, yeah, that was a stretch, but the reference is cool. So, the bearded men of Space Station 11 at Hasbro, of course, were busy at work scientifically finding ways to increase store presence, because that's what you do when you have a hit line. You want to sell more. And you do this through a planogram and through expanding the planogram. You can't just say to a retailer, oh, we'll ship you more basic figures and you could give us more pegs. It doesn't quite work like that. The way you expand a planogram is by adding new SKUs. So perfect examples of that are things like the cinema scenes that we've been reviewing lately, or the deluxe figures, albeit figures that came with larger accessories, figures that had a feature like light up. All of these are examples of expanding the planogram because the line was doing very well, and the goal is to capture as much retail footage. But the set we're going to look at today was really a new era in Star Wars toys because it was the first time we got figures that were just slightly different. Basically, everything was selling so well that Hasbro/Kenner could now make figures of one tiny specific scene. Now, this whole everything is awesome, we could sell everything kind of started with the Princess Leia collection when you had rooted hair and soft goods being sold in the boys' aisle. And obviously, Kenner, Hasbro, Star Wars figures going back to the 80s, well, Kenner in the 80s, did variants of figures. You know, you could get Luke from Tatooine, you could get Luke in his X-Wing attire, and with each movie, you got new versions of Luke. But for the first time, we were now getting what can be thought of as blink and you miss it outfits. In other words, a version of a character from one specific scene. As another example, in Motu Revelation, I was recently asked on a podcast about getting this version of Man-at-Arms with the cloak. And I really believe that the reason those kind of questions are asked, like can we get that, specific version, is because of these sets, the gunner stations, that were the new addition to the deluxe figure assortment. The gunner stations were figures with, well, gunner stations. They basically came with a giant weapon, and they represented an on-screen moment. Han and Luke came with the gunner station from the Millennium Falcon, from the scene when they're escaping the Death Star on their way to the Rebel base, and Darth Vader comes with a sort of chunk of his TIE fighter, which is basically, if you can't get the whole TIE fighter, hey, why not just get, the cockpit? Hey, why not? It was cool. And it shot, little green blast missiles out of it. They were cool, but what's really important is that from a toy history standpoint, this represented the moment in Star Wars figures when you had that, new hat effect, if you will, where figures could be put out that were just different enough that you already had a Han Solo or a Darth Vader or Luke Skywalker, but Hasbro Kenner was finding ways to really mine the content and discover slight variants of the figures from specific scenes that they could make as action figures to legitimately make a new version. And like the other deluxe figures, they came with an oversized accessory. Like I said, in this case, it was basically a giant gun that they could sit in, which is cool. Kids like, giant space guns and windows and all that. What kid doesn't like a window? I mean, come on. So Luke, Han, and Darth Vader were all just a little different. The original version of Han Solo we had in the late 70s, early 80s was sort of the main version we knew from the film. But did you know that Han Solo wears gloves? Not to commit crimes. Well, actually, no, maybe to commit crimes. I mean, he is a smuggler and a drug dealer, but that's not important right now. In a few specific scenes, Han wears gloves. He doesn't wear them throughout the movie, but there are a couple of scenes where Han wears gloves, and one of the most prominent is when he's in the gunner station. So this was a legitimate way of offering a new Han Solo, giving him gloves and the little headset that he wears when he's inside the Falcon's gunner. Now, we actually did get this figure as a single card release years later. A completely different, version. This wasn't the Power of the Force 2 one. It was a new, actually, it was a new head on a updated Han body that had come out since then. But it was, again, a repeat of this one movie moment. In fact, this figure was also the one that was packed in with the giant Legacy Collection Falcon along with Chewie, but same as the single card release. We haven't gotten a Vintage Collection version of him, but, hey, it was legit. This is a legit variant of Han Solo. And it was the first time we were getting sort of this much of a deep cut. And the same thing with Luke. Luke had been done before as an action figure, but this time we got him with slightly different details. He wears his stormtrooper belt that he stole from the Death Star, and he has, like Han, his gunner sort of headset thingy on his face sculpted in. Now, the original Luke from Power of the Force 2 is notorious for being one of the more buff figures in the line, because at the time, that was what Hasbro Kenner thought kids wanted. Since then, Luke started to get scaled down, first in the purchase of the Droids pack, where we got a Tatooine Luke with his micro binoculars attached to his belt. But we would also get other versions of Luke in more of a slimmed-down look. An upcoming wave, which we'll be getting to very shortly, was Luke from the Falcon, where he's more or less in his Tatooine garb. And there would be future Lukes as well, but never quite as buff as that first release. Though it might be kind of funny if they went back and did something like that as, a nostalgia. Well, fortunately, every future Luke was going to be a much more screen accurate. And the gunner stations were a way to do Han and Luke in a way that was, again, legit and a variant. And it really opened the door to this. With Vader, on the other hand, we got, actually quite a significant change in toy history as far as Darth Vader toys. The very first Vader had a vinyl cape, because most of the figures from the first wave had vinyl capes. Obi-Wan, the Jawa, and we've had Vader with plastic capes, and we've had Vader with cloth capes over the years. Different versions, updated, different scales even. And there's sort of no one way to do Vader. He has both a cape and usually what might be thought of as a skirt coming off of his belt. Sometimes it's plastic, sometimes it's cloth. Well, the version with the gunner station was the very first time we ever got a Darth Vader with a cloth cape. This was needed so that he could actually sit in the gunner station. He also had no skirt, which is significant, because we almost never get Darth Vaders in the modern line without the skirt. We would get another Darth Vader with a cloth cape in the Total Galaxy line, which we'll be reviewing shortly, since we're going in release order, but this one had hands that rested more on his throne, if you will, his chair. The version with the gunner station had giant C-clamp hands for grabbing onto those controls. So it was a very unique Vader, and it was different from what we'd gotten before. It did use some shared parts, but new arms, and again, unlike the vintage figure, no vinyl cape, a cloth cape for the first time. Now, the gunner stations never made it past this initial wave. Actually, Han and Luke came out first, then Vader. But, it would have been interesting to see how this could have continued with things like the Disney movies or the Death Star gunners or, even Hoth Base. Who knows? Tarn Far, could have had a gunner station. So it did its job, basically. It expanded the planogram, but significantly, it opened the door for Star Wars figures to do more and more obscure characters. And this was the wave. These were the releases that did that. Probably never would have gotten that Han and Echo-based jacket if it wasn't for this wave. Proving there is a legitimate market out there for really obscure versions of classic trilogy figures. In fact, this version of Han, I didn't even realize he was in the movie like this. It really is a blink and you miss him. It's when he's fixing the Millennium Falcon and, he tells Chewie, this one goes there, that one goes there. Anyway, we have the gunner stations to thank for getting obscure versions.